start in 2 minutes. Again, one more call. If y'all want to come down, be a little closer. We're not doing confession. Y'all should be all right, all right? So we'll start in about 2 minutes. All right, good morning, everybody. Good morning. One more time. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. A great UHD morning here. So I'm Jason Braun. I'm the Vice President of Advancement and University Relations here at the University of Houston downtown. It is a true privilege to welcome you today and to stand alongside President Blanchard and so many dedicated colleagues who work tirelessly to bring meaningful programs like this to life. As many of you all know, the President's Lecture Series is one of the UHD's signature initiatives, a platform that brings our campus and community together to explore important ideas, share many different perspectives, and engage in thoughtful dialogue on the pressing issues of our time. At UHD, we pride ourselves on being a place where conversation is not only encouraged, but celebrated. This series allows us to hear from our industry leaders, policy and history experts, and change makers whose insights prepare our students and all of us to better understand, navigate, and lead in an ever-changing world. Today's program takes us back 20 years as we reflect on one of the most devastating storms in our nation's history, Hurricane Katrina. We will hear from our esteemed panel, who will be introduced shortly, about the loss, resilience, and the role Houston played in the recovery lessons that continue to resonate today. And now it is my great honor to introduce the President of the University of Houston Downtown, Dr. Lauren J. Blanchard.
Thank you so much, Jay, and good morning to all of you, and a special welcome to our first installment of the new academic year. And we couldn't think of anything more fitting than to start this year with Katrina 20 years later, loss, resilience, and Houston's response. I'm Lauren Blanchard, President of the University of Houston Downtown. Also proud to say that I once lived in New Orleans for 25 years and was a part of the devastation when Hurricane Katrina struck struck New Orleans. In commemoration of the 20th year anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, today's discussion is the first installment in a two-part series on the storm's destruction, their people's resiliency, and Houston's remarkable response. Today, we are doing more than telling the story of the storm. We are telling the story of healing with and through community, including found community, as more than 200,000 evacuees transitioned from New Orleans to Houston to find immediate safety, housing, resources, and an opportunity for restoration. For many who lived through Katrina's devastation, it's hard to believe that 20 years have actually passed, and yet the youngest of our 8 UHD students were not even born yet when the floodwaters rose. Today's panelists are here in part to ensure we always remember Houston's remarkable kindness in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. Together, our panelists represent the intersection between politics, public service, education, and art, revealing a beautiful cross-section of Katrina's story from both the throes of destruction and the front lines of recovery. Mr. White, Mayor White, Mr. Sanchez, Provost Bordelon, and Mrs. LaMelle, I will leave the detailed introductions to our great moderator that I'll introduce very shortly, but allow me to thank you for lending us your voices today as we work to ensure this important story for our country's history and our city's legacy to never be forgotten. Now a historic event, the details of Hurricane Katrina are a steadfast reminder that healing and rebuilding in the aftermath of extreme destruction is indeed possible when leaders rise as servants and government works for the good of its people. Our moderator today, Mia Gradney, is no stranger to UHD and certainly no stranger to Houston. We saw her last in June with the screening of KHOU's Juneteenth documentary, Kinfolk and Family. An accomplished journalist, Ms. Gradney holds multiple Emmy Awards, a Gracie Award, and has been at the helm of multiple Edward R. Murrow award-winning newscasts. She is also the recipient of the MD Anderson Cancer Hospital's Karen Harrison Service Award for her work and dedication to pediatric cancer awareness and education. Ms. Gradney is a native Houstonian and a 3-time Emmy Award-winning anchor, host, reporter, and producer who specializes in breaking news and continuous coverage. She's covered everything from Hollywood red carpet premieres to top sporting events and, of course, historic hurricanes. As evacuees from Hurricane Katrina arrived in the Houston Astrodome, it was Ms. Gradney who was on site, where she managed to simultaneously grieve with the evacuees, offering direction to those who were lost, conducting interviews, filing reports, and giving the assurance that everything would eventually be all right. Ms. Gradney, I can think of no one more fitting to moderate today's panel. We are honored to have you here at UHD once again, and at this time, I'll turn it over to you so you can introduce the panelists. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Blanchard. Thank you for that warm welcome. UHD is family, so I'm delighted to be back here with you and to mark this remembrance. You know, anniversary is often associated with those things that are positive and happy, but I like to think of it as more of a remembrance and time of reflection for the city of Houston and for New Orleans as well. As Dr. Blanchard said, I was there at the Astrodome when the very first buses arrived with those people from New Orleans who very much needed our help and a hug. And for a while, I forgot how to do my job. I was just a person helping people who very much looked like my own family members, who were very much in desperation and very broken at that moment, and by literal means, families that had been broken apart in the waters themselves. So in that moment, you know, I said, don't cry, you know. You need to be strong at this time. And I just started helping direct people to where they needed to go, and the cameras were rolling, and those became the stories that I shared with people. It's hard to believe it's been 20 years. I want us to think about that, the amount of time. 20 years, that is 2 decades. That is 7,305 days. And there's been a lot that has made the headlines since then. Other storms that we have weathered, most certainly Harvey as a community, but so much that has happened in each and every one of our lives since then. And as I said, I was at the Astrodome. I was there for several days, and this story continued and developed from that first week into the second week, and it just evolved, and here we are 20 years later sharing and telling that story as well. I want to take us back and show you a video first off to get started with how Katrina unfolded.
WWL First News.
Southeast Louisiana is now in the direct path of Hurricane Katrina.
The way I remember it, it started moving further west.
Hurricane Katrina continues to move west in the Gulf of Mexico. The big question is...
Look at this cone of error here. It basically runs from Pensacola out to south central sections of Louisiana.
Fear started to seep into everybody here in the city, and certainly at the station that I was working at.
From WWL TV.
It was like, okay, this is really serious. This could turn out to be the big one.
Here's the projected path on Katrina. Right now,
what the weathermen were forecasting by Saturday was that this hurricane is too big to turn. It's gonna hit us.
That major hurricane barreling toward the Gulf Coast of the United States, Hurricane Katrina, is now a Category 5 hurricane.
Category 5, which are the strongest hurricanes we know of. Only 3 times before in U.S. history have Category 5 storms hit the U.S. mainland.
This thing is a very strong Category 5, 170-mile-an-hour winds.
People don't realize how big Katrina was. It covered the entire Gulf of Mexico.
As perfect a hurricane as you've ever seen, if you can call a hurricane like this perfect.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're here for our update on Hurricane Katrina. I am this morning declaring that we will be doing a mandatory evacuation. Every person is hereby ordered to immediately evacuate the city of New Orleans. This is very serious, and it's of the highest nature, and that's why we're taking this unprecedented move.
Within New Orleans, you have a high poverty rate. If you're going to tell poor people to leave, where are they going?
Katrina hit at the worst time to be poor in America. By the end of the month, you ain't got no money.
Around 5 in the morning, Katrina started to move ashore. The storm wasn't a Category 5 when it made landfall.
If you're just tuning in here in Louisiana, we're waking up to a Category 4 hurricane, but it is just below Category 5.
Then for a moment, when the eye of the storm came in, everything calmed down.
And that, as we know, is just the start of this story. And it wasn't so much the storm itself, but the breach and breaking of the levees that truly caused the disaster and the mass evacuation, ultimately, of New Orleans that would happen. So at this time, there is so much to reflect back on and to speak about. I want to introduce our panelists, and our panelists who join us today personally know how Katrina affected scores of people. They were either living the storm themselves or responding to it as well. So please join me in welcoming our esteemed panelists now at this time, starting with former Houston Mayor Bill White to my immediate left. Bill White served as Houston's mayor from 2004 to 2010. He was twice reelected with an average vote of 88%. A business management and finance expert, White also served as the Deputy Secretary of Energy of the United States. He received the prestigious John F. Kennedy Profiles and Courage Award for his leadership in response to Hurricane Katrina, and the Governing Official of the Year Award by Governing Magazine. Please welcome again Bill White. Sitting to the left of Bill White is Francisco Sanchez, a nationally recognized leader and consultant in emergency management and economic development. Most recently, he was appointed to serve as Associate Administrator of the United States Small Business Administration's Office of Disaster Recovery and Resilience. That is quite the title, my friend. Previously, Sanchez served as Deputy Homeland Security and Emergency Management Coordinator for Harris County, playing a key role in the response to several of the costliest disasters in U.S. history, including Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, Ike, and Harvey. I've been there to cover those all with him. Please welcome now Francisco Sanchez. Dr. Deborah Bordelon is Senior Vice President and Provost here at UHD. She is responsible for the articulation of the university's vision of academic distinction, the development and administration of academic programs, and policies relating to instruction, curriculum, and distance learning. Dr. Bordelon lived and worked in New Orleans during Katrina at Xavier University. Please welcome a familiar face around these parts, Dr. Deborah Bordelon. And last but not least, Kiana Walker-Lamal is Director of Executive Communications here at UHD. She's a New Orleans native and great-granddaughter of Houston civil rights legend Beatrice Lehman Green. Lamal also is an author whose award-winning novel, Behind the Waterline, covers Hurricane Katrina, from the moment of weather alert to a year after landfall. It is a beautiful book and read. I am told you might want to pick it up after today. Please welcome Kiana Walker-Lamal. Kiana and Deborah, I want to start with you both. Please take us back to the days leading up to Katrina. What was it like for you?
Sure, I can start. The Saturday before the floodwaters rose was an absolutely beautiful day. One of the things I most remember is that the sky was really blue and clear, I was completely unaware for the early part of that day that there was any warning in sight. I was kind of just moving forward with life cluelessly. The one thing that was a little eerie that day was that we did not have good cell phone reception. I'd gone to a writing critique group that morning, and the person I was picking up lived in an apartment. I couldn't locate them because I couldn't get the call through. And my husband, meanwhile, was trying to contact me because he had decided that we needed to evacuate, but he couldn't get a call through. It was just like you would dial, and the lines just seemed dead. But otherwise, everything in the city seemed normal. We did get on the road that day, but not thinking that we were in for the disaster we were in for. Just thinking that we were going to come to Houston because we anticipated a couple of extra days off from work, and we would visit our grandmothers here.
Make yourselves comfortable here for maybe what was considered a long weekend at that point.
And maybe because there would be power outages.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Bordelon, how about yourself? What were those days like leading up to Katrina?
Yes, as a native New Orleanian, I had been through hurricanes, and I was at Xavier University at the time, and I was serving as the chair of the Division of Education. We had just finished our first week of class for that fall semester. As Kiana was sharing, it was a beautiful day. You know, we thought, oh, you know, it looks like it's going to be heading for Florida. We might have to close Monday and Tuesday. You know, we met, talked about our plans if we were going to close, but pretty much finished off that Friday just as any other Friday. And so over the weekend, you know, I, again, went shopping, got my hurricane supplies, because, you know, you always get your canned goods and those kinds of things, ready to ride it out. And on Sunday, when there was a mandatory evacuation call, my husband was like, we have to leave. And we packed 2 days worth of clothes, figured we'd be back on Wednesday, and loaded up the dog, the animals. I had 3 cats and a dog in the car with me, and decided to head out, and truly just thought that it would be the regular hurricane drill, and we would be back, you know, on campus ready to go. But it was, you know, a beautiful day, and it was not, you know, we really did not anticipate the aftermath of when the levees broke and the water started coming into the city.
Had both of you ladies evacuated before for a storm, or was that even new to you? And did that make you anxious just knowing this is the first time we've had to leave home?
I had never evacuated before. It was truly the first time that I left.
Yeah, same here. I had never evacuated before, and I was personally really irritated that my husband insisted we leave. I had no desire to leave. You ride out storms in New Orleans. It's what you do. I had a really bad headache that day, and I just didn't feel like getting on the road. I had no desire, so yeah, I begged him not. I was like, please, can I just take a nap? Can we go later? Can we think about this until tomorrow? But it was our first time leaving. It was also our first time bringing our dog on the road with us. So we left with, it was my husband and I, my mom, 2 toddlers, an infant, and a German Shepherd in a Kia Sedona.
It's just amazing that you survived the ride, let alone the storm and the aftermath.
It was a tough journey. It took us about 16 hours to get from New Orleans to Houston, and at some point, I think we came out before contraflow because it was before the mandatory evacuation. It was 16 hours for what would normally be a 6-hour drive.
And we know you came to Houston. Dr. Bordelon, where were you destined for with your evacuation?
We had gotten a hotel room in Blytheville, Arkansas, because they took animals. We had tried to find a hotel where we could bring the pets with us. And my husband is originally from Alton, Illinois, and so we figured you know, Blytheville, if we had to stay a couple of extra days, we could go visit family in Illinois and then come back. But we were in the hotel room after the storm had passed, and we were watching the news, and we were getting ready to come back to New Orleans when we saw on the news that the levees had broke. And then we knew that we were not coming back to New Orleans anytime soon.
And again, that was the most significant part of this storm, was the breach of the levees. Talk to us about the extent of the water in those communities impacted, even being able to see it on TV and perhaps talking to those who were still on the ground there in New Orleans.
Well, you know, in my house, we had about 3 to 4 feet of water. We knew from talking to people who stayed in the neighborhood. But at Xavier, you know, when the storm passed, I had called to see how everything was going, because we still had students in the dormitories. They were, you know, we had a few people who stayed, and they were like, you know, the hurricane has passed. We have some tree damage. A couple of buildings might have, you know, some roof damage, but everything was okay. When the levees broke and the water started coming in, Xavier had 6 to 8 feet of water coming in. And there were students who were there that, you know, needed to get out. There were individuals that were there. People were bringing boats to evacuate the students. But the whole campus was covered in water. And so it was, you know, at that point in time, we realized, you know, again, we were not coming back anytime soon. The president, Dr. Norman Francis, did, you know, state, we will be back, and we will be back in January, which, you know, at the time, seeing 8 feet of water covering a campus, it was like,
how is that possible?
Exactly, but, you know, to his credit, his vision, his dedication, we actually did come back in January, but the buildings were, you know, totally destroyed, and many of the students, you know, their dorm rooms were just covered in waters.
We know the areas where those levees were breached greatly impacted historic communities and historic communities of color and impoverished neighborhoods as well. So much was lost here, including lives, and we definitely don't want to overlook that. As for those who survived, these are the people that we saw at the Superdome and that we saw at the Convention Center as well. Give us a frame of reference for those communities and the impact there, Kiana.
Well, I guess one of the first things is that making it to the Superdome or the Convention Center wasn't necessarily that didn't necessarily mean survival. There were lives lost inside of the Superdome as well as inside of the Convention Center. The neighborhood we lived in Gentilly. Gentilly is a historically African-American neighborhood. We were not hit quite as hard as the Ninth Ward of New Orleans that was completely destroyed. Gentilly, though, was heavily hit. We had nearly 8 feet of water in our home alone. We did lose some of our neighbors. Our neighbors across the street passed away in their home. So, you know, you can't, the thing about a flood, though, is if it's 4 feet of water or 8 feet of water, especially when you can't get back onto the premises for weeks, the earliest arrival back was a week, and that was just a part of the population, medical personnel, officers, clergy. You couldn't get in and tend to your home, and you're in, you know, the temperatures are in the 3 digits. So by the time you get back home, you've got mold and mildew and everything, absolutely everything has to be gutted out and started over. But New Orleans was, at that time, more than 60% African American. So just by virtue of the demographics of the city, you're going to have that disproportionate effect. The reality is people were hit who were of all backgrounds and of all income levels. recovery just feels completely different. I distinctly remember we were 30 that year, and the amount of money we had in savings was $200. And in that moment, we lost our home, and we also lost our source of income because the entire infrastructure of the city was destroyed. And so when you don't have savings, you know, recovery looks completely different. So it was, you know, you were hit whether you had money, had wealth, or whether you were, you know, impoverished or close to the poverty line. But recovery looked completely different depending on your circumstances.
We're going to talk more about recovery in just a moment, but from devastation to desperation, and we're talking about everything, the basics here. Food, water, formula, very important medication, especially for the elderly. Former Mayor White, what were your observations from here in Houston after those levees were breached and we were seeing the masses at the Superdome and at the Convention Center in New Orleans?
Well, thanks, Mia, for asking. I mean, I learned not from the national news or local news, but from the CEO of Shell that the levees had broke. And I knew, you know, it benefits some of the students here. You read, sometimes you learn something. There was a book by John McPhee called Control of Nature, a third of which I'd read, was about what would happen if the levees broke in New Orleans. When you build a city below sea level, you know, his point was, you know, Mississippi River is awful powerful, and so is a natural disaster. So I knew that the city would be uninhabitable because a city, modern American city, without clean water or power is uninhabitable. And when there's water that has various organic materials that could be poison. So, you know, you said it. I mean, just the logical things: food, clothing, and shelter. There were things that I didn't anticipate. For example, we had to set up pharmacies, and there were numerous Red Cross shelters. I mean, journalists all went around, maybe the Astrodome because it's a good backdrop, but there were George R. Brown, and there was about 14 other Red Cross shelters throughout this region. There were over 80,000 people in hotel rooms, motel rooms with no, you know, place to make food. But, you know, for example, pharmacies, a lot of people didn't have prescriptions. So we had to really lean on, you know, twist some arms to have special dispensations that a pharmacist wouldn't be prosecuted for, you know, fulfilling a prescription without having a prescription there, fulfilling, you know, we avoided some of the abusive substances, but it was just the day-to-day things. But my principal thought, I had two thoughts, and I articulated them from time to time. One is, let's, you know, treat our neighbors the way we would want to be treated if it happened to Houston. By the way, the idea of doing unto your neighbor how you would like them to do unto you is not original by me. I did, you know.
I think it dates back quite a while.
It dates back for a while, and I taught it when I taught Sunday school, so I did remember it, you know. And the second is that I didn't want, I wanted people to look forward and not back. And that meant that the normal Red Cross emergency management FEMA playbook of shelter and return, we needed something different. And it wasn't going to be what FEMA wanted to do, which is, you know, herd our citizens onto these big luxury liners that they, you know, rented for $500 million, which was 2.5 times the entire housing program we did for 2 years. Or, you know, in parts of Arkansas, Louisiana, they built trailer cities. Well, people were isolated. The kids couldn't go into school. How can you seek jobs when you're in a trailer city, you know? So I want to say, how do we get apartments that have utilities and have furnishings and some money for folks so they can buy, you know, what you were talking about a little bit earlier, so you can just get by. And that was what I was thinking about. How do you do all those things? It's a long story, but that's what I was thinking about. How do you get people out of shelters and on to their lives so that they can regain employment and start to feel that self-sufficiency and independence that we all love.
There's so many different layers there. Even you just talking about the pharmacy, right? The layers involved there. Let's take a look back real quick at Houston's response.
They are the tiny and frail.
This is hard. I've been here about in a week.
You're waiting for a bus like this one coming behind me.
Some kind of bus. Bus was here last night, but it didn't take us nowhere.
She is among the many who've been waiting for help at the New Orleans Convention Center.
We didn't get any food until yesterday when they started dropping the food down from the helicopters.
I'm gonna just break it down to the real reality. You know, they're not gonna get everybody out. Some of these people that are living right now, they're gonna get left behind.
They don't even do this in third world countries. They go out there and they save people over there. You know what I'm saying? We stay in the United States, dog. At least what I thought was the United States. And look how they doing us.
When you're in charge, I'll let you do that, okay?
Rescue workers and guards say they're doing all they can. If you think the evacuees are desperate,
we're looking for my Aunt Lynn Honoré, my Aunt Yvonne, Samaya Borden, Joyce Borden.
meet those who came to Houston looking for lost loved ones.
They were last on the roof in New Orleans East on Tuesday night on the roof of the house.
Right now, I have 20 people at my house in Orange Park, Florida, and I'm trying to find the rest of my family.
Diane Kelly flew in from Florida trying to find her big brother.
I know they was in the attic. I don't know where they are now. I have not seen any of them yet. I saw my brother's picture out here, and I'm trying to find him now among these people.
There are many more like her inside the Astrodome.
I'm looking for my family, my whole family. My kids gone, my grandmother, my uncle. I don't have no one, just me.
5,000 of Katrina's victims have claimed cots on the floor. They are among the fortunate ones. 11,000 others are sleeping in the stadium seats, waiting for scenes like this, to find family and to find out they survived the hurricane too.
I came looking and I saw her. It's my cousin. This is beautiful.
Hello? Yeah, what, Cookie, where are you?
Diane Kelly's big brother finally called.
Why you have on a white shirt? And what else? Huh? Okay, I got on a green blouse.
Lewis Nelson was just around the corner.
I thought I lost you.
He's here, so are his grandkids.
You made it out. Hello, Brian.
The Nelsons thought they could ride out the hurricane. They ended up getting rescued.
I told you to get out. You wouldn't listen to me.
Yes, I'll never make that mistake no more. She called me all the way till the phones went out.
Diane Kelly is flying them all back to Florida. $1,500 she spent for 7 Southwest tickets. So thankful she found family, but still looking for more.
And the people in Houston, they open their heart, they open their arms. The people in Houston are so wonderful.
Houston was such a place of hope. It was, and I witnessed that firsthand. It was such a different place for the people from New Orleans and what they had experienced, and then they had come here. They were treated like human beings here. They really were. So who ultimately made the call to bring New Orleanians to Houston to shelter them here, Mayor?
Let me tell you the real frame.
Please do.
Which is that, you know, Katrina hit New Orleans, levees broke, there was flooding, and where would people go? They'll go to an interstate highway next to the largest metropolitan area that is close by. So sometimes I hear the words invited and things like that. No, there were, you know, as I say, probably 80 to 100,000 people here before buses started to arrive with people from rooftop, because they have relatives here. There were churches that were, I was at the churches that where they, you know, had tents and everything like that. We did make a decision, both me and County Judge Robert Eccles within our respective jurisdictions, to say, hey, the Red Cross shelters, we're going to I just told the conventions that were booked at George R. Brown, sorry, we're going to need the George R. Brown Convention Center. It took Commissioner's Court a couple of days to cancel the conventions in the Astrodome. And those were, large emergency facilities. But the real answer to the question is it was logical for people to come to Houston, and a lot of people were headed this way. I mean, the mayor of Baton Rouge I'd talk to quite often, and their population almost doubled. Well, there were 5.5 million people in our metropolitan area, and we could take 250,000, right?
So how many people did we have at the Astrodome at its highest population or head count there?
Yeah, so with the Astrodome, we had about 65,000 people come in through this entirety. At max, we had about 17,000 people in the Astrodome proper, about 7,000 in the Reliant Center, and about 2,000 in the Reliant Arena, and the other 38,000 came through at some point and then went to city facilities, hotel rooms, or apartments. And so the Dome, what you saw there, also became sort of, whether it was invited or not, what you saw is a huge contrast between what was happening at the Superdome and Convention Center in Louisiana and what was happening in Houston. And so for them, that was a beacon of hope. Whether they needed a place or whether they didn't, or they were simply trying to connect with relatives and lost family members and friends, that became the initial destination point. Aside from the shelter itself, it became the initial, I'm here, what do I do, where's my family, and many of those moved on elsewhere.
I remember leading so many people to what I call reunification checkpoints. There were boards with information posted and people there to assist. It really ended up being so much more than a shelter. Can you give us an idea of the layout and the services that were being provided to people at the Astrodome?
We built a city at the Astrodome in a matter of days. It really had to be another city, right? Think about just the facilities in general. The facilities are meant for a baseball team at the time and a football team to shower. 35,000 people, we needed to build showering facilities, we needed laundry facilities, we needed, to the mayor's point, in terms of medical, we knew when the call came on about 4 a.m. on August 31st, we were expecting 23,000, 25,000. Many medically frail, special medical conditions, so 100,000 square foot medical clinic, pharmacies. You literally could get your eye exam in pharmacies and see a physician and a doctor within about 45 minutes, which you can't even do today out of a disaster. So very proud of the medical team that stepped up. You had a post office. We had to create our own zip code. And the only place that you could mail to someone if you're looking for somebody was your name and the Astrodome. So at the end of the day, we had about 1,350 buses come over a course of 6 days. And so mental health care services, connecting folks with education, connecting them with anything that they needed. So it was really building a city in a matter of days to accommodate just the sheer need.
And much of this operated on volunteers and volunteerism, correct?
6,003 people for 60,000 people that came through. So Houston really stepped up.
What were some of the stories and things that you heard when at the Astrodome from the people who had come from New Orleans? I know as I walked around, I'm not walking around with something that says, I'm a journalist, tell me your story, but people inevitably in conversation told you their story. What were some of the things that people there at the Dome shared with you?
Yeah, and so one of the things, and we talked about this earlier, one of the most striking conversations we would have is people thought they were going back in a matter of days. They had lived what they lived at the Superdome. They had no real understanding of what was happening outside those facilities, and so that for us was a very incredible challenge. Again, people looking for a family member. We had people throughout the country calling us and saying, including people that were at the White House at the time, saying, do you know where this person is at? And so a lot of that and connecting with folks. I'll tell you also, what you saw over the course was some incredibly beautiful moments. The first animal to get reconnected with its owner was a chicken named Lucy. A chicken named Lucy. How a chicken survived on a separate bus entirely is a miracle unto itself, right? So, and just the other thing, we actually had a wedding. Folks whose wedding had to be canceled married on the floor of the Astrodome by Evander Holyfield, of all people. And then
Where was I for that story? I missed that one.
And so in the middle of the Astrodome, we found her a gown, we found the groom a tuxedo, and then we all pitched in to get her a nice hotel down the street for the weekend for their honeymoon. But at the end of the day, I think when you look at just all the stories, just the lingering impact for what Houston did, it made our city better. Our economy was stronger, our culture is richer, our food was elevated, and the music got a lot more colorful. So despite Houston doing what it needed to do, we were great beneficiaries and inherited a tremendous infusion into our city after that.
And Mayor, I know that you were at the Dome. I remember you at churches at the time, really out in the community, because those people who had evacuated were throughout the city of Houston. What were you observing when you were going out beyond even the Astrodome and into the community and speaking with these residents from New Orleans?
Well, in your previous questions, you know, things that really stuck in my mind, just conversations, was talking people to get off buses where they were apprehensive that they would go back into a situation like they had left in New Orleans. Or in our meetings that Francisco is at 8 to 9 every morning, that we had a leadership meeting with about 100 people present, working sessions. A lady came in and was identified as the housing director of the city of New Orleans, and she had been taken off a rooftop. And then when, you know, she was identified in her responsibilities, she wanted to be plugged into our housing program, which she was. And she said, you know, I was expecting this to be chaos, but this is so competent, you know. And so that, but I met with a lot of people, and this is basically what I said. And there was some dialogue back and forth. Some of the things, when are we going to get back? Well, if water power doesn't work, if somebody says it's going to be 2 months, it's probably going to be 6 months. If they say it's 6 months, it's probably going to be 9 months. You know how people in government can be. And so, you know,
says the former mayor.
Yeah, I mean, you know, sometimes people exaggerate because they're more, you know, they want to get people off their back. So they, you know, and I know it's a tremendous undertaking. So I said, look, my plan is to give everybody a chance to be in an apartment that's near mass transit, that has furniture, where you have, you know, electricity on, and don't worry about that. We got it. And we're going to move people out as soon as we can. And you're not going to have to be in a shelter, or some of the people were in motels and packed in like sardines and stuff like that. And we're going to do our best. But we will get it done. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to obey our criminal laws, you know, and respect the rights of your fellow evacuees and other citizens here. And if you are able-bodied and employable, you know, find employment. If you are having trouble finding employment, we set up specialized programs for education and training, particularly career education training. And we will enroll you in one of these programs free of charge. And then we will have employers lined up to do it. And your kids got to be in school. And it can't be an excuse for goofing off, because you don't want them to get behind in the school year. It was right at the beginning of the school year. And once a young person becomes behind a couple of months in class at the beginning of the school year, it changes their performance and their very identity. So I didn't want them to get behind. So that was the nature of the conversation. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what, you know, we expect folks in Houston to do. And that would be true whether they were evacuees or not. And the other thing I'd say, the attitude, and Francisco and his team and others had a good attitude. I remember a meeting where somebody, I think it was a federal official, referred to the people who were in the shelters, at the time it was the Astrodome shelter, as our guests. I said, no, wait a minute. This is their home. For many people, the only home they have. So when we walk in there, we're their guests. And that's the way that we ought to, you know, be. It's not like we're doing somebody a big favor. I mean, in fact, all we're, able to do is to live the principles of our faith, which is a privilege and not a burden. So.
And this is what we do as Houstonians, right? Very much so. You talked about those next steps, I call it, ensuring your children were in school, finding more permanent housing. How did we transition? Because this really became a prolonged response. This wasn't just immediately after Katrina, but a prolonged response. How quickly were we able to transition into getting people a more stable, long-term recovery path?
About 3 weeks, and boy, there was a lot that had to be done in that 3-week period before we started moving people. But we had to sign up. We had meetings with 600 apartment owners, some of whom had to bring their apartments up to code within a matter of weeks. We had to print vouchers, which we came up with that didn't exist within the FEMA program, saying to the landlord, I told the landlords that I will make sure they get paid come hell or high water, but we had no authority to do that at the time. Thank goodness the Congress and the White House moved pretty quickly to help us on that. And then you had to line up a whole supply chain. I mean, the first person I called on that Monday, I remember, was the lead director of Walmart saying I needed your supply chain for Walmart's supply chain. Look, I mean, FEMA and, we aren't set up the way Walmart is, or whether or Walgreens or CVR or some of the things. So I started calling the heads of major corporations all over this region and all over the United States, saying, here's what I need. And to a person, they would respond.
Yes, and you made things happen, and I know so many people are grateful for that. And I know you said Houstonians were doing what we should do, right? I often think of doing the right thing, respecting other people and treating them as though we wanted to be treated. Ladies, how did you feel about the response from Houstonians when you were here and how they acted?
The response was unbelievable. Just remarkable kindness and access to resources. As I said, my children were very young at the time. My oldest two received early Head Start services, first in Houston's 3rd Ward and then in Cy-Fair after we were able to transition to housing in Cy-Fair. We received vouchers for clothing and resources. I found out I was pregnant a week after the floodwaters rose, and I received prenatal care here in Houston. My daughter was born in Cy-Fair in April of 2026, because yes, part of it was, as they started moving people, we ended up, out in the suburbs. But honestly, we ultimately had everything we needed to pick up the pieces of our lives and start over again. My husband started working in security for a while. He was a displaced pastor, youth and young adult pastor at the time. He found employment in security. We just honestly, even down to a library card. And that was huge because we didn't have, my grandmother was in her 90s. She didn't have a computer in her house. She didn't have the internet, but I could go to the library in the 3rd Ward, get on the computer. We could handle our insurance claims and everything that we needed to handle. It was absolutely amazing.
One word comes to mind in listening to you share that is resilience. It really took resilience on your behalf and thousands of others to move forward because you've lost everything essentially. And so resilience comes to mind, especially for the people of New Orleans as well. I know that you returned eventually, Dr. Borderlawn. How did Katrina and the levees breach impact New Orleans and really the psyche of the people there in the community?
Well, I think, you hit upon an important word, resilience. And, when we were talking about the response, our students at Xavier and our faculty and staff were scattered all across the country, and many were in Houston. And our students needed to take classes, and institutions of higher ed in the Houston area welcomed our students, no questions asked. What do you need to take? And so I was on the phone with students. My area is teacher education. I was advising pharmacy students. I was advising, any student who called, I was on the phone. And institutions stepped up, and just the immense kindness and patience and understanding of the need for that sense of normalcy for our students to succeed. And so many of them, we had students who were doing student teaching in New Orleans. We had to place them in schools in Houston. And people just went above and beyond just to help our students and help our faculty and our staff. And coming back to New Orleans, again, it was that understanding of that people care, and that resilience of being able to say, okay, in a time of immense uncertainty, and the city, even when we were able to come back in January, the city was not ready, in many ways. I've shared with people, I think the court systems had opened up. I was on jury duty just about every other week because there weren't enough people in the city to serve. So I just kept getting,
Bless you.
Yes. It's like, okay, But what was wonderful, though, was in that jury room, it was like a homecoming. As people were walking in, it was like, oh, you've returned, you've come back. And for many of our faculty and staff, they had no homes. New Orleans East was devastated. Many of the areas in the lower Ninth Ward, devastated. And so there was an actual FEMA trailer park on our campus so that people could return and work. Our students, we had to find places for them to go. And the dormitories were able to get some of them up and running. Xavier is a Catholic institution. There was a convent. We put students in the convent to get them back on campus. But we had to make sure that they understood that we wanted them to be successful. And again, their experiences here in the city of Houston really provided that understanding that, yes, it's traumatic, but you have the support, you have the love, you have the kindness of the people here, and that you're going to be successful.
Mayor White and Francisco, how did Katrina shape Houston's legacy, and how did it prepare us for Harvey as well?
I think, and the mayor touched on this a little bit in terms of what our moral obligations or responsibilities are. I don't think cities are any different. There's that saying that character might be tested. You don't build character during crisis; it reveals character. And if that was a test for Houston, we passed. And I think we continue to carry that legacy in terms of how we respond to disasters. But in terms of being able to prepare us for future disasters, it was 20 years ago. We are in a changing environment. But one of the things that really changed the landscape in Harris County in terms of being able to deal with crisis is FEMA wasn't built for this. There wasn't a rule book for this. There wasn't a playbook, and there wasn't a whole lot of structure. We simply built it, and I think the guidance from Judge Eccles at the time, and we lived it every day, was don't do what you have the right to do. Do what's right. And so when we needed to create a plan, whether or not we were going to get reimbursed, whether we needed to open up our school systems, whatever we needed to do, we simply do that. And that has been the culture that into which Harris County in this region has tackled disasters since then. And so while Katrina really laid the groundwork on the federal level too, you change, every major change in how this country deals with disaster has come from a major event. First it was civil defense, then it was Andrew, then it was 9/11, and then it was Katrina. And I think we're really beginning to see the third evolution of how we change disaster response in this country, but it won't be because of a huge disaster, it's because of the incremental consistent, persistent, more frequent disasters that we're having across this country that are straining the system. And so I think what Harris County and this region do right is coordinate, collaborate, and coordinate. And we really have taken to heart what we learned during Katrina was the federal government may not come at all at the end of, and if it does, all disasters are local. And it is at local leaders that need to step up to the plate and to make sure that we get things across the finish line. And so I think that's why Houston is better positioned right now post-Katrina, because we have lived that ever since.
The local response has to be there. They have to be the first responders. Right. Okay. As we wind down here, we want to reflect on some facts and figures for you. According to the National Weather Service, the data center in the Houston Chronicle, my colleagues there, 1,833 lives were lost from the storm. 40% died from drowning. Nearly half of the victims were over the age of 74. Katrina caused $160 billion in total damage, making it one of the most devastating storms in our nation's history. 80% of the city of New Orleans was flooded. Houston took in about 200,000 storm survivors, more than any other U.S. city. And the Astrodome itself became a shelter for about 25,000 evacuees. Exact numbers, they do vary, but Houston is home to many people and families who fled Katrina, got caught in Hurricane Harvey, but are staying here because of Houston's stronger economy, and I'd like to also think because of Houston's people. That resilience, of course, is to be celebrated always, each and every day. Ladies, do you think that you celebrate in this? You know, some people say they survived the storm. Some people say they weathered the storm, learned from the storm. Does this embody who you are now, what you've been through?
You know, I know personally I have definitely learned from the experience. And, you know, part of it is not taking anything for granted, knowing that things can disappear very quickly, and very basic things, utilities, mail, you know, having a home. And understanding that, you know, again, to appreciate the kindness, the, you know, the community, in the sense of that, you know, we need to treat each other well as we are going through, and that the stories that we have an impact on, you know, how we view the world, and that it's important for us to provide that support. But definitely that resilience and understanding was learned from this experience.
I would say that I developed an immense appreciation for community and service. I do not at all develop attachments to physical things on this other side of Katrina. What matters most are individual lives and people and what we can do for one another.
Well, we thank you for sharing your stories with us. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to the audience. If you have any questions for our panelists, if you want to step forward to the microphone here, we have time for a few questions. If anyone has any, we'd be happy to share. I know that we've discussed so much, so perhaps there aren't as many questions there to ask, but if there's something that you would really like to know about or further explore, feel free. There's a microphone right here down front. I know for myself, it taught me in just reflecting about things, being a person first. You know, on that day, I literally was like, I'm not going to make my deadline. That's what I was thinking at first. If I keep walking with everyone and trying to help them find their family member, or holding their hand, or I mean literally hugging people and patting them on the back and saying, you're okay now, this is a different place. I mean, people told me I don't want to be here, right? Because I think they were so afraid they were walking into another Superdome. And I know at some point I was like, oh, well, they'll have to understand at the station, too bad. What am I gonna say? Oh, excuse me, you don't know where your child is, but I've got a story to file. It just told me that doing the right thing and being a person always leads to the best for everyone involved. And some of these people I heard back from at a later date, I didn't even remember telling them my name, or maybe it came up in conversation at some point. But doing the right thing always serves you the best. Well, hello, Dr. Blanchard.
Hi there. So just a quick story that really sums up everything that we've heard here today. So when Hurricane Katrina hit, I evacuated first to Lake Charles, which is my hometown, and then ended up migrating back to Baton Rouge. And I remember oh so well the whole notion of medication, that there were lots of people that I knew that were in Baton Rouge that had left New Orleans, but they couldn't find any information on their medication. So I got the list and I went to a local pharmacy there in Baton Rouge, and obviously many other people had the same notion because the line was wrapped outside to go in to start asking questions about how we can get medication for people. And it ended up being where so many people in that line were from New Orleans, and they started telling all their stories, and it became like a reunion. Like, it was the weirdest thing ever to see that dynamic. But I remember oh so well that there was a woman there that, if you're from New Orleans, you would know her name is Arthel Neville, the Neville brothers. She is one of the sisters that's a performer there. And she told the story, and it was the most bizarre thing. I felt like I had an out-of-body experience hearing it. She said that things were so bad that she had commandeered a school bus. And so once somebody said, commandeered, what do you mean by that? She says, I stole it. So she stole a school bus, and she went to all the neighborhoods where she saw elderly people, and she got them all on the bus. She drove. I said, well, Sigmund said, what about the keys? The keys were in the bus, right? And so she drove all throughout, and that she had first stopped in Baton Rouge, but she heard that the best place to go and the only place to go was Houston, Texas. She said because she knew that not only that they would take the best care of the elderly people on that bus, but because they knew that they would be able to not survive there, but they'd be able to thrive. And I remember that story so distinctly. And, you know, first I was like, gosh, she stole a damn bus. But
maybe I shouldn't be talking to her right now about this.
But the reality is that, you know, it didn't take long for the word to spread that Houston was the place to be for people to thrive who lived through Katrina. It was a really, really hard time for many of us. And so I just say thank you, Houston, for all that you have done for so many people. In helping them now, for many of them who even thought that they would not have that second chance. Many of them who perhaps were working in jobs that they thought that were kind of dead end, but they had a new start, a new beginning, and it's thanks to Houston.
There you go.
Thank you for sharing that story, Dr. Blanchard.
Perhaps, could I share a benediction if we're wrapping up? So
Please,
it looks like we're wrapping up.
I think we have one more question, and then after that, please do.
Hi, my name is Deborah Evans, and former Mayor White. I almost didn't recognize you. You look so relaxed. I almost didn't recognize you, but good. Thank you guys for sharing your stories. It's been I know people that was here in Houston during Katrina is very emotional, and some of the things we saw on television was heartbreaking. But I want to give Houston kudos because I know people that actually took people in their home. I know churches that actually had brought in homes for people to live on their properties. I actually saw this. So I just want to give kudos to Houston and people that was here, that we are a city that we are so welcoming, and that I actually saw that happening. So I still want to give kudos to Houston and Mayor White. You look so relaxed again.
Thank you for that. Yes, sir. Hello.
I just have two questions. So, what is one story from the Astrodome that sticks out to you personally?
They all do. I have to tell you, I've covered so much in between Katrina and Harvey. Those will forever be with me. And it wasn't so much the unique stories. For me, it was the people at Katrina who I was looking at, who I was like, you look like my uncle, and grown men crying to me. I'm a native Houstonian, right? So we are H-Town proud. The men I grew up with did not cry. Like, I literally was thinking, this is the end of the world. There are Southern men before me crying, people were pulling on my clothes, asking me for help when I would walk by. This was the very first day people arrived here. And I just remember thinking, like, what is going on? And like, okay, you have to be strong in this moment and help people. That's all I thought. You have to be the voice of calm. And who knew the lessons that I learned there? Because that was 20 years ago. You have to think I was age 12 back then, reporting for a TV station. So fast forward to Harvey, 12 years later, people were calling the station telling me they were trapped in their roof and they were afraid they were going to die. And I reflected back on, remember how you helped those people by remaining calm and telling them it was okay and offering any type of advice and solutions that you could. I think for me, it was their stories that they would share of desperation, but in the end, the story ended up being, the first night I was there, it ended up being about me walking with people and trying to help get them to the right space that they needed to be in, the right person. And it really, for me, cemented like always doing the right thing and always being a person of service to others when they need it. That was it for me.
You did an excellent job in reporting, but just kind of sidebar onto that, like, do you think people's fears and just, releasing all that emotions, it was just, maybe they just came from the Superdome or they just lost everything? Do you think it was probably part of that or just a combination of everything?
Yeah, so share a little story at the start, and then what I saw midway into the tail end of it. On the first night, the buses came a day before, and we had security perimeter, and the buses showed up anyway. But somehow, 2 women made it past security, and I encountered them in the hallway just after midnight. They had blankets and teddy bears, and wanted to know where the children were. And so I took them. And this was in the arena. We had a special place for kids away from the Astrodome. And in an empty arena, you hear everything. And so we walked in, and as you hear the doors open, about 10 little heads pop up. And I had never seen hope disappear so quickly from kids' faces, because it wasn't their family. But just a few weeks later, people that came in, Mia, that you talked about, that didn't know what they were doing, someone created their own coffee shop inside the Astrodome. A quarter for a cup of coffee, because what they had that we didn't was chicory, right? And you went down the hall, and someone had created his own barbershop, right? So these were people, and that's where we turned a blind eye. We didn't have the health inspector come in. We told them to keep walking and to keep moving. But those are the kinds of stories where you see where people came in on these days just not knowing what day it was, what was happening with their lives, and some of them finding enough peace there that started their own path to resilience, and all we needed to do was provide them not maybe a place to live comfortably, but a place where they could live and have the promise of moving on to those next steps.
Yeah. And then just 2 more things, like, so what was the parking situation like at Reliant Park at the time? Because also keep in mind, Astro World was across the highway, and they share a parking lot with Reliant Park. So was it complicated just to bring supplies in, also sharing the parking lot with various venues there?
I don't remember if Astro World was open then or not, or if it closed, but I will tell you that the biggest concern, to your point, was that was also the first season kickoff opener of a first major NFL stadium. So we had to get creative, but Houston was understanding. You think parking was bad now at a Texans game. The first one at a new stadium in the middle of all that, but everybody worked through it, and we made it work.
And my last question is, I just visited New Orleans in July. Beautiful city. I would say they bounced back perfectly, but when you visit some spots, especially in the ward areas, the east side of the town, you can see where there's empty lots and people have never rebuilt. And even 20 years later, Six Flags New Orleans is still abandoned, and there's a lot of different abandoned places in New Orleans. So if a hurricane similar strength to Katrina hits Houston, would you say confidently that we could bounce back fast, or it would be a gradual progression?
Well, I'll take that. Look, I mean, Hurricane Ike in 2008 was very close to, it was, very close to the worst case on winds. So, 90 to 110 mile an hour winds. They had a little worse. Northwest eye wall hit a little further up the coast, but not much farther. So, as I told people at the time, hey, we have a lot of trees, we're not going to have power. Ice is going to be a priority, refrigeration. But we did go through a test. Now, Harvey, I will tell you that I looked at the, they call it bell curve dispersion of probability of storms, and it wasn't a million year, 1 in a million. It wasn't on the map to have 50 inches in a little over 4 days. And hopefully that's an anomaly, but judge for yourself, the city's come back. 64 inches. Yeah, 64 inches. I mean, it was over 50. And so, it was an anomaly, but we've recovered. And, I was always taught that we can't nobody sort of chooses when they are born, and very few people get to have a big say in when they pass this earth. Nobody can control the weather, at least not in the short run. And, we can't worry so much about what we can't control, but we should pay attention to how we respond to bad things. And, based on what you've heard around this room today, then, it is actually possible for some good things to come out of a bad thing if you respond to it in the right way. I mean, I think there's probably, Mr. President, people here who've gotten lower grades in a class than they wanted. They've studied a little bit more and they got a better grade next time. Actually, the only way, the human beings, our skulls are so thick sometimes that the only way we learn anything is by being beat over the head by experience. And I think we've learned a lot.
Okay, and our final question, the lady behind you. Thank you so much for your patience.
Hi, everybody. So I was a part of the relief effort. So I was opening 5 new affordable housing communities at the time, and we had transportation. I was 12 as well. It was an after-school program, DEA, I don't know. Anyway, I guess I'd really like to know what key takeaways did we have from this experience that we put into city government that maybe still is a key thing to look at in preparedness for anything that happens in the future.
Yeah, I would say to those 2 questions is we need to be honest about who we are as a city. And as we reflect on 20 years, I think we need to look at what we've been through and we have the potential to go. What I often hear, we're the 4th largest city, we're the 3rd largest county. And look, I'm a Texan, I love me some bragging rights, but I think it misses the mark. We are an essential region. And in my opinion, we are traveling this country for 3 years for the former president. I think we are the most essential region that fuels the nation and powers the world. But we have chosen to stake our lives and our livelihoods and what we hope for the future in a place that is a prime hurricane landing zone. And I think the way we get through that is to be honest about where we are. And by that I mean, we are on the precipice of some great things. Like, if we want to be competitive in this world, we need to redouble our efforts on renewable energy, right? To expand where we are on oil and gas, from the Texas Medical Center to invest in AI, from aerospace to take us beyond the moon. But if we are going to build that here, we need to protect that investment, and we need to be honest about where we live. When we spend, and by that I mean, we need to be honest of how we do that. The vast majority of our investments in housing come through disaster housing dollars. The average HUD allocation to this region is $50 million. For Harvey, it was $1.3 billion that we couldn't spend quick enough or efficient enough. For Derecho and Beryl, it was $381 million. That is just one example. I think we have an opportunity in Houston and Harris County to be the most resilient city in the nation. But I think we have to also, and I'll close with this, Katrina is how we started taking a real serious look at that in this region. Harvey, right, are now tied together as the most costly storms in our nation's history, and the response of that centered here. I'm optimistic for Houston. I'm hopeful for this region, but we need to be honest about where we are. And I think if we plan accordingly, as we prepare and as we respond and as we cover, if we tie resilience to that as an absolutely essential element of everything that we do, we're going to be doing the most resilient city in the nation, and we're going to do great things.
I couldn't agree more, and I think with that being said, if I may, just one more thing, that the city has been struggling with how to allocate some recent CDBG funds in response to prior storms, and I guess, for me, that's another big issue that we really need to maybe predetermine, what percentages of incoming dollars get to go to different groups.
And I think you're talking about
And better
Beryl and
criteria.
the derecho, and
That's
yes,
right.
the funds available
That's
since
right.
then, right? Yes. Well, thank you so much, everyone. We appreciate it. We are so grateful to have heard from our esteemed panelists here as well. And this is just really the start of these discussions that we'll be having. A bonus, we're going to have a part 2 of UHD's observance of Katrina 20 years later. It continues next week. That's at 6 p.m. on August 28th with a special presentation by Angela Blanchard, a nationally known expert on surviving disasters and the former CEO of Baker Ripley Neighborhood Centers and the City of Houston. Her topic, you ask, shipwrecks, how we go on after the unthinkable. That crucial and remarkable presentation that will take place, once again, right here in this very auditorium at UHD at 6 p.m. Thursday, August 28th. It's free and it's open to all, so consider this your invitation. Mayor, I know you said you had a benediction that you'd like to share as we wrap up here.
I think people are hungry. But,
well, would you like to say grace instead?
But I will say this, there was one other thing, and let me, this is in people's minds. So I went there was a church called Fountain of Praise that I go to from time to time on the south side, and there was a lady, she was probably 80, this was 5 or 6 weeks after Katrina. She came out and we began talking after services. And she said, Mayor White, I'm so glad I just want to tell you something remarkable. See, so I remember, you're probably a young boy at the time, but they passed these civil rights laws, Voting Rights Act. And there were some people say they changed everything. But I said, no, they're not going to change everything because they're not changing attitudes. They're not changing attitudes. That's not going to change in my lifetime. But then I saw that in Houston, you look at the national news, they were talking about a bunch of black people, there. You looked at Houston, and we were just looking at fellow Americans and our neighbors and taking care of them, and it didn't seem to matter that most of them were African American. He says, I never thought I'd see attitudes change in my lifetime, but I want to tell you, I was wrong. And isn't that something that is a sign of maturity for our community, where somebody just, and it wasn't until 1965 that an African American couple went to a movie theater that had been segregated before, right? I mean, that's remarkable progress that we made. Thank goodness.
Amen. Thank goodness for that. Thank you for sharing that story as well. I'll turn it back over now to Jay Zambrano.
Thank you, Mia. Thank you, Mia. And thank you to today's panelists for sharing your touching experiences and perspectives. Let's give these folks another round of applause. I also want to thank each and every one of you in the audience that have been part of this important conversation. I'll just say that as an outsider, I've been living in Houston for the last 3 years. As an outsider, I lived in San Antonio when Katrina happened, and we did a little bit of our part. I think we were talking about the numbers of San Antonio receiving folks from New Orleans, and the numbers, I looked it up a little while ago, and it was between 25 and 35,000. And it felt that everywhere we went, we met people that came to our city. And we also received the New Orleans Saints for that wonderful season. And Jerry Jones made sure that we were not going to get an NFL team anytime soon. But anyway, and then when Harvey happened, I lived in the Rio Grande Valley, and we've always watched from afar what a class act city Houston always is, responding either for others or themselves. So again, another round of applause for the city of Houston, our city. So before we conclude and our panelists, leave, we want to take some pictures, so please stay behind. And also we have a little token of appreciation. But just to let everybody know, I think you all received some tickets already. There will be lunch in 8300, so we don't want to be any more, we don't want to take any more time between that. We know everybody's hungry. But we want to thank everybody again for being part of this wonderful event today. We thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you at the next President's Lecture Series. So thank you so much. Have a great day.
You look good, man. I look good. You work well.
They want your
all of this is just
I knew it was 20 years, but when we went to it, I was like, holy crap, yeah, like there's... My daughter was